In today's discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about how to get you to think differently about networking, disrupt your thinking, what networking can be, not what it has been. We're going to offer some tips on how to do it in a modern way and how you can network to enhance your life and your career. So let's get started. We want to start out with a clip of what most people think networking is about. This clip is from Ugly Betty in 2009, and networking back then might have gone a little bit like this. So we're going to roll the clip first.
Here's my card. Maybe we'll do business someday.
The gorgeous gourmet. That is catchy. Here's mine. All right. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Well, that wasn't so
Terrible.
horrible.
Could not have gone worse. You spent 22 minutes and 47 seconds talking to a caterer. A caterer!
He was interesting.
Useless. The point of networking is to gather information to advance your career. Watch and learn. Step 1, forge a bond. Your name, where you work, and one memorable fact. I'm Mark St. James. I work for Little Minutes Later. I once had a threesome with John Hamm and Mia Hamm. I called it the night of the ham sandwich.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
It's memorable.
But it's a lie. Or is it?
It is. Step 2, gathering information. In order to get info, you're going to have to give info. Do you know why Heidi Klum never wears open-toed shoes? The trick is to make it sound juicy, but really mean nothing. 12 little piggies. It's disgusting. I'm not even kidding about that. So what were you saying about next month's cover, Laura? And most importantly, step 3, the exit strategy. Get in, get info, get out.
See, I don't like to be rude. I mean, how do you just stop someone in the middle of a conversation without hurting their...
Betty, could you just hold on 1 sec?
Oh, okay, I get it. Okay, Amanda, I get it. Amanda.
She's not coming back, and neither am I. I've given you all I have to give.
No, Mark, don't go. I'm not ready.
Yes, you are. You're a mean, not so lean, contact-getting machine.
That was good. Okay, so after seeing that, I'm feeling a little anxious. I don't know about you guys, but, Amy, is this how networking should be done, and where do you think it's evolved to today?
Well, this is the old way of networking.
Yeah, well, initially we were trading locally, in London and the South East, but I felt that there was such a lot of potential in the North.
Sorry for that. Into the YouTube for a second.
So that was the modern way, not really. That was 2009, and things have evolved, Carol, as you said. Networking is really now more of an art form, and it also can be fun. This was an example of networking being someone who was just learning, evolving, and really getting into how networking can be a little bit different, and giving her new thinking. And that's really how networking has moved into a more modern way. Our networking is really an art, and everybody can master this art. Networking was once defined as the exchange of information and services among individuals and groups, according to Webster. According to others, it's the art of building long-lasting relationships. So how many times have you heard the saying, Carol, it says it's not that what you know, it's who you know? And for me, today, there's a belief that networking might have been the number way to find a job, but really it's a great way to create wonderful professional opportunities. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the modern ways as we go through the presentation today and give you some different thinking on what networking might be.
So not everybody is in the same place in their career. Can you share a little bit on how networking can benefit them no matter what position they're in at this point?
Well, you're right, Carol. Networking isn't different, or it isn't the same for everybody, is the perception that people have. And networking really can satisfy you in a lot of different ways. And when I look and I work with clients, I work with them at many, many different stages in their career. I work with clients who are strivers, builders, and transitioners. These clients that I work with are really struggling with how to go out there, and they're all the same in that respect. But how and what you're looking for is how you differentiate yourself as a networker. So if you're a striver, someone who's looking to conquer the world, get promoted, maybe they're looking for some recognition in the current job or looking for somebody to support them as they approach that next career path step that they're looking for, that networking could give them the opportunity to learn from others and meet people and develop long-term relationships, and maybe even acquire a mentor. A lot of times when you're just beginning out, you think networking is going to lead to something, but having a mentor is another great way to network so that it can help you grow in that current job and position you and put you in a place where you're ready to be promoted. I also work with people who are builders. So for a builder, it's someone who might be a visionary and could be a designer, an entrepreneur, a visionary leader, somebody who's really stepping out and wanting to do something new. And they might even be looking for funding. They're an entrepreneur. They're looking to launch a new business or a new idea. So that, because you are in that place of being a builder, it can open new opportunities for you and expose you to other business owners and executives who can provide contacts, guidance, and also help you launch and execute your vision. So the value of networking is that it's introducing you to people you might not have known, or through wonderful friends or colleagues or events that you've attended, you're meeting people who are moving you in the direction of where you want to go as a builder. For a transitioner, it could be somebody who's been downsized, capsized, or at a crossroads in their career. It opens new doors and exposes them to new and exciting possibilities. So no matter what stage you're at in your career, networking can open doors, and it really can create wonderful opportunities. I know, Carol, you and I talked about your story a little bit, and I know there was something you wanted to share today, so why don't you share that story, because I think it will resonate with so many people on this call today.
You know, it's funny, when we first started to put this together, both Amy and I have been in the industry for over 20 years and been in very similar companies, large companies where we build strong relationships with people. And for me, you know, once I left that company, I didn't keep the connections going of my friends and colleagues from those companies. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago when Diane Sullivan and Carol Bayaki started Wi-Fi that I realized I wanted to be involved in the industry, and I started to realize that those friends and colleagues that I never kept up with, along with the new ones that I were meeting, were so important, not just for my work, but also for, you know, myself and my goals. And one of the things that I think that is great about whether it's Wi-Fi or it's any organization that you're involved with, it's not just about your career, but it helps you with your soul. You know, it gives you that rewarding aspect of your life. So I think when we all think about this, and often I say women tend to do this a lot, we're great at creating relationships, but we sometimes get caught up in the work-family balance thing, that we put on hold our friends and our colleagues for, you know, our family and our career, that sometimes we don't do as good a job in the networking side. So Amy, how can we start to use this more, you know, for all of those things we talked about?
Well, connections are tremendously invaluable, and you talked a lot about your story. And one of the things that's really fascinating when you can use networking as a valuable asset is an example of how I met you and how I'm here today through one of my colleagues and clients who introduced us. And that was a great use of her connecting us and really creating that wonderful give and take. Here I was coaching her and working with her as a coach and helping her through her job transition, and yet she introduced you and I and gave us this wonderful platform together to really interact and give and take. So she was giving to me. And it was an amazing experience, and I call that the give and take experience. There's so much about that that's wonderful. And what happens in a give and take connection is not so much about what's in it for me, but what can I do for you? What can I give you? What can I share with you? And I talk about this in a way that I went to an event, and I met this lovely young woman at an Ithaca College networking event. And I went because they were doing it for students, and we went as parents. They invited the whole family. And I seeked out this lovely young woman, and when I seeked her out, I listened and I talked to her, and I did a lot of active listening. And I was fully present during that conversation. And what happened through that conversation is we started sharing stories, but yet I was wanting to give her a way to help her plateau her career to the next level, and giving her ideas and ways that I might be able to introduce her to people. There was a lot of commonality through sports. There was a lot of commonality of people we knew, which was so funny and ironic, and she couldn't believe it. And it was this incredible encounter for her as a networker, as a young professional woman just out of college, 2 years. And what happened in that equation and that interaction was that I made contact with her, but I shared with her some wonderful things. So as she told me her story, I was giving, and I wasn't really taking at that moment in time. And that's an example of how you can give and take, and maybe in the end, she might come back to me and start a job and might seek me out many years later and say, you know what, I need help navigating that job. But that networking interaction was one great experience and one great example of how that giver, being the giver and that give and take happens, and people then begin to feel comfortable in that situation.
So you've talked a little bit about finding value in common ground. How might that add value to your successful networking encounters?
Well, commonality is a way to break the ice. It's a way to make a conversation easier. Talking about activities, talking about things you both enjoy, or being an event that's common ground for both of you. And with that happening, it really makes that conversation move along in a way that you feel at ease. So finding common ground and being with like-minded women or like-minded executives, however you might describe that, is really the experience that makes you feel like networking can be incredibly valuable to you. There's a great book that both of you and I shared commonality here with, and we talked about it when we first met. It was a book called Captivate by Vanessa Van Edwards, and she talks about the similarity attraction effect. And what was so great about that is she talked about that humans are constantly on the lookout for people who are similar to us. And that's what happens with networking. So not only in that example of that give and take, but how networking, when you're in a common situation, can really benefit you. You know, I watch my husband network. He jumps in with a conversation starter, not his name, and the conversation goes on from there. And it's really this very organic process. And he typically finds commonality. I think we all have learned that men love to talk about sports. And that seems to be an icebreaker for them and that common ground. For women, it might be shopping, it might be fashion, it might be something we've seen. But finding that common piece is really, really important. And I watched him network, but not only just doing it one time, but he's an ongoing networker. So there's this ongoing dialogue and relationship that happens. And you and I have talked about that so many times, even though you have like-minded women and you network, we're not always great about keeping up those relationships. We go back to our office, we get into silos, and we forget about that. But that commonality of saying, let's grab lunch, or let's go do something together, or let's go to an event, is a great way to network with people and meet others. So that, again, it goes back to being with like-minded people doing like-minded things, really makes the networking process a heck of a lot easier.
And one of the things that you brought up, and we haven't used the word yet, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, is passion, finding people's passion, and hopefully through that, that helps to create a great dialogue. But can you share with me a little bit about your story and how you might network to find those common grounds?
Well, as a coach and also transitioning my career and creating a second act for myself and evolving over time, I needed to network. And I really needed to dig deep to find common ground. And I would go to events, and they weren't the kind of events I wanted to go to. I wasn't connecting with people I felt were going to help me move or make decisions of where I was going to go next with my career, stay in the job that I had, do something different. And so I found this incredible group called Savor the Success. And what's really interesting is their mission is to help you build a successful business for financial freedom and enjoy friendship and collaboration. And I think that's really important. It's an organization that talks about not just financial freedom and growing your business, but about friendship and collaboration. And I was looking to build my network and my resources, and the irony about why I decided to join this group was about 9 years ago, I actually was a leader at Ladies Who Launch. And I met this amazing woman named Angela Kim. Today she is the founder and owner of Savor the Success. But what was really fascinating was we were leaders together, and she was just beginning to launch a business. She was a concert pianist, she was networking, and she and I had a common ground. We were both looking to be entrepreneurs at that time, but we both were leaders for Ladies Who Launch. 9 years later, I was doing some research. I had watched her business grow. I decided I was going to go to their holiday party. And I went to that holiday party and I reconnected with Angela and saw this incredible business she had built and network. And through that, and attending this network and being with these women was just incredibly powerful. It was fun, it was exciting. I met wonderful entrepreneurs, women who had seven-figure businesses that started from nothing, people that had worked in the fashion industry or other industries that became new business owners. And with that happening, we created this amazing connection, and I've met some lovely women and connected with them through Facebook and other ways and getting together. But what was extraordinary is a relationship that I had made 9 years ago. When I saw Angela again, it was like we had, not that time hadn't passed, but that there was that common ground and common thing that we had shared, which was doing something together and becoming entrepreneurs. And so that's really, a great story about what happened to me, and I'm sure so many of you can resonate with that, you've met people through your career and your path, and you're so afraid to reconnect with them, but sometimes just jumping in and doing it and going back is a great way to move forward, because that's where you have some of your fondest memories and you've built those connections that really can help you move to the next step or the next level of where you want to be for your personal vision.
So is this how you decided to start your business, and is it helping you grow it?
It definitely is how I decided to start my business, was through the courage of being an entrepreneur. But I would say that attending the group just continued to give me the confidence and give me the thought process that I could do this, watching other women and seeing what they could do. The give and take and the sharing was just tremendous, and knowing that I've got a network of resources and people who can recommend different people to do different things as I would grow and evolve as an entrepreneur is really a tremendous, tremendous support system for me, and they will lead me to other people that I can network and help me grow and evolve when I need that. And it's not just being an entrepreneur, but it could be for other benefits in your career or launching a new idea.
So a lot of times when I go to events, even our Wi-Fi events, I find that people go to get past the anxiety, they go as a team or a group, and what often happens is they don't talk to people outside of their group, so they're really not getting the power of networking. So what's your advice to them for making the most of any event?
Well, the most to making the best of any event is really for you to be brave, to really get over the anxiety and know that there are going to be a lot of awkward conversations. We all know that when we walk into a room and there's 100 people or there's 25 people, your heart's pounding, you're feeling all this stress, you're feeling all this anxiety, and really in the end it's about having a conversation. Those strange emotions and feelings that you have, they'll sort of dissolve. And I mean, you talked about the fact that it's great to go to networking events. One of the tricks that I've used is going with a buddy, going with a colleague or a friend who's networking themselves or dragging them along, and sometimes they go begrudgingly, but that is a way that you can feel a little bit more at ease in going to that networking event. And it does conjure up a lot of emotions, but when you're tag teaming with someone, and you and I could talk about that if you and I went together, Carol, you're introducing me to somebody and I'm introducing you to somebody, and all of a sudden that room of 25 or 50 or 100 people seems a lot smaller. And so that is another great way of doing that, so that as you feel more comfortable doing that, you really can walk into a room and feel more confident with networking. But I have to say, we all feel that way. And you and I talked a lot about that when we were starting to put this together, that so many of us feel that same stress, anxiety. And I asked my husband, and he said, you know what, I feel the same way. So it's not just a woman thing. I think when you go into a room with strangers and being in that environment, sometimes it doesn't necessarily make you feel at ease, because you don't go in thinking, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I think, one of the things when you go to a lot of these events, you still see that there's so, I see, even at the gala that we just had, I go in and I think, well, I'm involved in Wi-Fi. I know so many people. Then I go to the event and I'm like, oh my God, there's so many people I don't know. And you get that whole feeling of isolation. So between that and the loud music and all of those types of things, how do you get past that feeling of yuck? Do I really want to go to this?
Well, I feel the yuck a lot. And I can, I'll share a story with you in a little bit about that yuck. but really making sure that you identify and recognize friends and resources you already have. That's the example I gave about you and I going together. It's about attending events or getting involved in something that's common or comfortable for you. If you're going to a 210 event, it's saying, you know, to a really dear friend, let's walk in together or let's meet up. So that once you walk into that room and you're together, you're in it together and you're not feeling that yuck. But you did bring up a point. You don't want to just be hanging out with just the core group of friends, because you want to be broadening what you're there to do, and is to expand your network. And as I said earlier, it could be for many different reasons. You could be at so many stages in your career. It could be for you to grow your business. You could be working for a large corporation and you're looking for web designers. You're looking for factory resources. So being exposed to that will be great ways to do that with going with a buddy, but not just hanging out with your friends. Also, using social media and online tools, they're great, but you don't want to hide behind those, because if you stay in your house and you network, or you stay in your office and you network, you're never having that personal interaction. But online social media tools can help you overcome some of that, because it could be a great way to have an introduction and then go to an event or go to a meeting. So how you use social media and the way you see it is okay. Also, sites like LinkedIn provide opportunities to meet new people through introductions, and also LinkedIn is another great tool that we'll talk a little bit about further, but it is a wonderful way to help get rid of that yuck. Going to relevant events, we've talked about that, and also letting go of the negativity and focusing on common ground. I would say to you that that's definitely important, and we'll talk about how you might be able to let go of some of that negative energy.
So what gets in our way?
I would say fear, anxiety, stress. And fear is the #1 excuse that holds people back in social networking. And with that fear, a lot of times we think we're going to say the wrong thing. We're not going to say something that people are impressed with. Somebody's a senior leader and you're afraid to approach them. They're very powerful in the industry. But they're like you. They're networking. They're just, even though they're important in the industry, it's about feeling comfortable and relaxing. It's also saying, wow, I'm going to go into a room with strangers and I'm afraid of what I'm going to say, or am I going to say something stupid? Am I going to do something stupid? And actually, you just need to sort of get past that, because everybody is feeling the same way. Even though they might be a senior VP or a president of an organization, they're still people, and there's still a way to interact with them. But again, it's going to be about that approach that you have. So when you go into that room, you ask me, you know, how do you get rid of the yuck? And you are feeling afraid of starting the conversation. You are feeling afraid of being judged, saying the wrong thing, afraid of being rejected, and not being smart enough or good enough. All of those things are so real to you, and that's what you're feeling inside, but on the outside, people don't see that. So you have to remember that you're there, and you've got all this expertise and experience, and you've got to be confident in who you are. You've gotten to a great place as a leader or a business person, so all of those feelings have to be left outside the room. And that's easy to say. Sometimes for people it's hard to do. And when I coach and I work with clients, we spend a lot of time talking about that fear. What's getting in your way? How might you be able to do something different? And that's the mindset that you really have to think about.
So what other ways can we go about to get past that fear and anxiety?
Well, part of the fear also comes from unfulfilled and unrealistic expectations. So I want to talk a little bit about that. You know, when you go to those unfulfilled and unrealistic expectations, you walk into a room and it's a traditional, boring format. The opportunity, it's only an opportunity to make connections, but it's not really. That's how you think about it. But it really doesn't have to be about just making connections and collecting a business card and walking out of the room. But that's what we think it is. It also doesn't have to be a struggle to what you're going to say, because we're going to arm you a little bit later in the presentation to talk to you about how you can have a different type of icebreaker that will help you get past that. And we also go into these events with very preconceived, unfulfilled expectations. We walk into the room thinking, oh God, why do I have to go? They're boring people. I don't want to have this interaction here, and it's not going to be fun. So why can't it be an opportunity to be a more hip event? and to talk about a different approach and have more fun? Why can't you reconnect with prior colleagues and friends and invite a group of people to meet at a restaurant and have dinner and create your own networking event? Why can't you meet more interesting and new people by reaching out to them on social media tools or attending group webinars where there are group chats and everybody can be seen on a Zoom video and signing up? It's a great way to create it in a modern approach to networking. And if you want to build a network effortlessly, you can do it through some of these other tools. And also go home being fulfilled and excited about who you meet versus going to an event and feeling like, oh my God, why am I here? And so many of us, and I'm sure that's resonating with so many of you, we say that so often. So there are ways that you can get there, and we are going to talk about that.
You know, it's funny, we started, I think it might have been about 6 months ago, and the New York chapter tested a wine event, and we all got to go and learn a little bit about wine and try new things, and tonight we're actually doing a shopping event. So it was something that all resonated with us. It's that common ground that you were talking about, and we all had fun. We met people and we had fun. So how, if you're going to an industry event, might you approach it a little bit differently?
Well, again, we talked about going with a friend. It might be going with a different mindset. It might mean that you're going to interact on a smaller scale and not go to the large events. You also have to be in your own integrity. You have to know what's going to make you feel comfortable. If you know you're not a great networker and to walk into a large room of hundreds of people, be prepared for that. Think about how you're going to go to that event and what you're going to do differently. And also think about who you might want to meet or what you might want to do so that you can have a different type of interaction, or maybe you choose not to go. And also, you know, create social experiences and opportunities that resonate with you so that you can create those meaningful connections and do things that feel more unique to you. And I talk about a story for myself where I was going to some events and they didn't resonate with me. So I had to shift my thinking on approaching it a little bit differently. And I want to sort of go to what I alluded to before, and that is having a meaningful conversation. So recently, I had an opportunity to hear this wonderful speaker. His name is Joshua Sodick, speak about how to have a meaningful conversation. It was an incredible webinar. He had an amazing approach. It resonated with me in a way that I could walk into a room and say, wow, I'm armed with something that I could do differently. And it all of a sudden shifted my thinking from that horrible room in that event or going to an event that didn't mean anything where, oh my God, I'm so fearful I'm not going to be able to talk to anybody, to really having a new way of thinking. He has a great technique. And it goes like this, Carol. And I'm going to role play with you for a second. And it goes like this. Hey, Carol, if you don't mind me asking, what's a passion of yours besides work and family?
Oh, I love to cook. I'm such a gourmet cook, and it's something that I do, from food and magazines to TV.
Oh my God, that's so cool. You know, my best friend is a cook and a nutritional coach. And wow, you guys have so much in common. That is really cool. So tell me more about that.
Well, I think, you know, I love to learn new things, so I don't know what type of cooking they do, but maybe there's a way that we can, you know, talk and, you know, maybe I can learn something from this person.
So that's a great way of approaching it. So again, what I did was I addressed you and said, Carol, what's a passion of yours? As opposed to saying, hi, my name's Amy, I'm an executive coach, and what do you do, Carol? And that creates this very awkward feeling. But all of a sudden, I began to engage with you in having what I call a meaningful conversation. So one of the things I do want to say is there was a slide up before, and it showed a photograph of Joshua speaking to a wonderful man named Marshall Goldsmith. And Marshall Goldsmith and Joshua did this great video of role-playing, like Carol and I talked about it. And Carol will talk a little bit later about a toolbox that we included, and I included the link for the video because I thought it was so powerful. And what it does is it gives you a very different way of approaching somebody and having a conversation. And that meaningful conversation, you could see it with the interaction with Carol and I, led to a common ground and a commonality. as opposed to it leading to this conversation which was awkward, and all of a sudden we felt this tension. And, you know, maybe Carol was not wanting to talk about what she was doing. You know, maybe Carol didn't want to talk about something that was happening. Maybe you were, you know, talking to somebody who just went through a job transition or was just laid off or was just downsized or capsized, and they're really feeling pretty emotional about that. So I didn't go in for the kill. I went in for, tell me about your passion. And through building that conversation about passion, what we did is we started to create commonality, and we started to create a little bit of trust amongst one another as we started to talk. So there are different ways of having conversations, and starting with a conversation is really important, and we talked about that. So we did give you an example of that. So how to make meaningful connection. It starts with a question. I started with a question. I asked her about her passion. There wasn't small talk, and a lot of times you go to these events and you're like, oh, God, if I have to have more small talk about the weather, and that seems to be the one thing, you know, oh, there was a snowstorm. How bad was it for you? Did you get a lot of snow? I mean, you're like thinking, wow, why am I here? Like, why am I talking to this person about snow and the weather?
Or what do you do and what company do you work for?
Exactly. And again, if somebody is pretty vulnerable and feeling a little insecure about themselves, when you ask them what they do and they're not feeling confident, it makes it hard. If you're approaching somebody at a senior level in an organization and you wanted to just conjure up a conversation and introduce yourself, it's also another way of having an icebreaker, because you're not going to walk up and say, hi, I'm Amie Blumberg, I work for you. You're going to walk up and have a conversation. So suddenly we're making a connection. It might feel others feel comfortable. You know, this industry expert, Joshua, talks about he's developed a meaningful connection exercise, and it removes the stress and anxiety. And that's what I was trying to show you in the example of role-playing with Carol. It takes away that horrible feeling that you might have had, and that goes back to how do you network without the yuck. So I want to talk about the third piece, and that's creating meaningful relationships. So we talked about starting with a question. We talked about interacting with somebody and starting to build trust, but there are other ways of doing things. We're going to talk a little bit about storytelling. We're going to talk about a connector. We're going to talk about business card follow-up and tools to maintain connections. So we're going to go through some of these because these are different ways that you might be able to do some of that. So storytelling can create connection. Carol and I started to have that.
I mean, in many cases, storytelling is a little bit about giving of ourselves. You give a little bit of vulnerability, and people call it the ping pong concept because you share something about yourself and then you say, have you ever experienced that? And you get to learn a little bit about that person. So I think it helps when you're vulnerable, although it's not always comfortable, because it makes other people want to give to you as well. So what happens, though, when you don't have a connection, you know, and somebody, you know, is not working for you? How do you move through that?
Well, I think it's important that you know going in with some expectations that networking isn't always smooth sailing. There definitely are going to be awkward experiences and awkward moments and times when you're saying, okay, you know what, I got to move on. And I think that Ugly Betty video, they talked a little bit about how to move on, and we will explore that a little bit. But it's really about how...
We won't leave them hanging, right?
We won't leave them hanging. No, absolutely not. But I thought that, you know, Carol here was a great place to share a story of recent. And that was, I went with a friend. I followed my own advice, and I went with a friend to a Chamber of Commerce event in New Jersey. And lovely people, and it was at a restaurant. When we got there, not a lot of food left. Everybody was eating. We were only about a half hour into the event. But what happened was it was like the yuck factor the minute I walked in the room. And I was like, oh my God, my head wasn't in the game. I wasn't excited about being there and mingling. I was talking to people, but it was that small talk. I was trying to be an active listener, but I was feeling really frustrated. I was thinking about, okay, well, how am I going to get more clients? What am I going to do? And I was in a really, not in the headspace, but in a really bad headspace about the event, because I was like, I walked in and that's where I was like, oh, this is the yuck. And what I realized is scanned the room, and what I had to do was find somebody who I could create some commonality with. And so what I did, what happened and what I did is I opened with a question. I met this young woman. I spotted a young woman, and I said, wow, you know what? Maybe I should talk to her. I didn't want to talk to accountants and lawyers, and nothing against them. But you know what? It was one of those situations that, you know what, they were hunting for clients. And I wasn't there. I wasn't the ideal client for them. So they were very dismissive of me, and it wasn't really a great conversation. So when I found this lovely young woman, we all of a sudden struck up a chord with a commonality. She was a coach. She just had transitioned to her career, and she was working in the coaching world, but doing life coaching. And what happened was I started thinking and talking to her differently. So I shifted my thinking from selling my business and working with people who were selling and being defensive to all of a sudden being a great listener. And I started listening to her story, listening to what she had to say, listening to the message that she was sharing with me, and all of a sudden it was like, wow. And then I started becoming a giver. I started giving her some ideas and saying, have you thought about that? Or, oh my God, there's someone here that I know who could help you do that. And what happened was that conversation shifted. So all the things I've talked about up to this point, I began to practice. I practiced not having unrealistic expectations with her, talking to her and relaxing, asking her a question, talking to her a little bit differently. And what ended up happening was I gave her a great resource for her to update her LinkedIn. We connected. We've had an ongoing dialogue. And she and I have done a little bit of the dance of give and take. But because I had that different interaction, and by the way, I did this after I had gone to the event with Joshua, I recognized that the value of talking to somebody about their passion and having common ground was really a great way to begin the storytelling. And so I began to do storytelling with her, and that really led to a great interaction.
So how might that work in terms of you've met them, you've talked to them, so now what are some of the other ways that you can continue to build those relationships?
Well, there's a lot of ways, and I think one can get incredibly overwhelmed in this process, Carol. And so you really have to know yourself. You need to know your bandwidth. You need to make sure that you plan it into your schedule so that you don't feel overwhelmed and stressed, because when you look at this, networking can come from so many different places. But it's not necessarily going to work for everybody. Not everybody is going to go to their communities. Not everybody's going to want to go to a meet and greet. A lot of times you're going to want to use colleagues or look at different opportunities or social media. So you need to know that you're in that middle, you're that connector. And how you and where you go and where you want to network is really important. So isolating events and selecting things and planning it into your calendar and saying, well, if I want to be an active networker and I work full-time, but I want to just keep networking going because I'm growing my business and I might need resources as I go through my job, I might really want to think about doing that a little bit differently. So everybody's got to approach networking on how it works for them, and also saying which of these things can I leverage and which of these things do I want to use. And for different people at different stages in their career or networking, you're going to pick the ones that feel the most unique to you.
So time is precious. You aren't able to take advantage of all the different groups, and we're going to talk about some of these, but what would you recommend?
Well, I think it goes back again to what you're doing. But for someone like myself, I've really used Facebook, and I joined Facebook groups. So I joined the Liz Claiborne Past and Present group, and it's ironic, Carol, you and I discovered that we worked at the same company at different times, but our paths have never crossed. So being part of that Past and Present group for Liz Claiborne is a great group. They hosted a wonderful event. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it, but I know many of my friends did go, and they reconnected with so many wonderful people. I do believe that Paul Sharon was there, and so many other great people showed up. And it really was a great way to reconnect. So thinking about where you worked before and those relationships you had are so important. I think so many of us say, oh my God, I haven't talked to that person in 9 years. It doesn't matter. Because you know what, in the end, those relationships are your relationships. And interacting with those people still brings back great memories and great relationships, and also they know who you are. So if you're looking to transition your job, if you're looking, for a mentor or looking for a factory resource, being at that Liz Claiborne event would have been a great event because there would have been people there that had left Liz who now have other jobs and have moved on, and it just becomes a plethora of information. So Facebook groups that lead to events are always wonderful groups. I also found that for me, finding some private events has always been great. Being in LinkedIn groups is also wonderful because it's a lot of great sharing of ideas. But I think you have to find the one that allows you to manage your time, the one that gives you the space to be somewhere. So if you find that you're working full-time and the best that you can do is go to an event once every couple of months or interact and connect with people on LinkedIn, great. Set yourself a goal. Say, you know what, I'm going to network X amount of times, but give yourself that ability to do it as an ongoing process so that it doesn't feel so daunting. And also make sure that you practice having that meaningful conversation. And you can also have that same meaningful conversation when you're connecting with somebody through an email. It's been a long time, we'd love to see you. You don't have to start out, but there are ways. One of my things is I always love to say when I'm connecting people, I always say in the spirit of networking, because it is in the spirit of networking. So somebody knows up front that I'm going to connect you through networking. And I just did it the other day to a wonderful colleague I worked with and somebody I recently met, and they have a commonality coming out of the intimate apparel world. And I write an email, it's up to you. You guys connect, and I hope it works out. And, I was that conduit. So that's another way of networking, but bringing people together in your network.
Well, I think it's important, and you said connecting, and we've talked a little bit about that between ourselves. One of the things that even Vanessa talks about in her book is trying to find that commonality when you connect people. So when you send that email out, you're creating that bridge so they can get past the initial, conversation, so they can find it. So you know them the best. Put it together, let them know what it is, and really try to let them start from there.
And I think, Carol, the one thing you said is it's got to be relatable. It can't be pie in the sky. And if you're going to do pie in the sky, you've got to do it so that it is relatable if you are looking to make that networking connection through social media or an email, or doing it a little bit differently than the typical event. But again, it's finding a circle and a place where you feel comfortable and you know the value of what it's going to give you. And that's really the important message.
Yeah, I think that all of those different things, whether it's a combination of social media or it's something that's an event, I think it's not one thing, that's networking. It's that combination that works for you. And I'll tell you, when I first started with LinkedIn, and it hasn't actually been that long for me, and there's still a lot of women, especially from our age, who aren't even on LinkedIn, believe it or not. But when I started, my whole thing, people said you had to have at least 500 contacts before an executive recruiter would even look at you. And so you start to build your network, but not necessarily always with people that you have close relationships with. So one of the things that I've tried to do over the last 3 years is only create LinkedIn relationships with people that I truly know or who have been connected to me. So is that right? Is that wrong? I get LinkedIn requests from people in factories that I'm never going to use a factory. Now, if I was in sourcing, I might, but who should you connect with, and how do you use that area correctly?
Well, there's a couple of schools of thought on LinkedIn. One is yes, being very selective on who you do connect in with and having those unique relationships to you, and also it pertain to where you are. There's also another school of thought, which is one of the more recent ones. If you are a small business owner or an entrepreneur or someone who's looking to do different things, is the more that you have allows you to market your business differently on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is shifting their thinking on how they are working with their members. And if you're using it from a business perspective, the more the merrier, because you're getting your message out. But if you're using LinkedIn in a more insular way and creating commonality, then yes, being selective on who are your connections is very, very important. But I think what's really important about LinkedIn is the value that it can give you is reaching people that you might not have ever reached before, and connecting with friends and colleagues in a different way. And LinkedIn, for many, is a tremendous business connector. And it can be used not only just for connecting, but learning. It can be used for going to webinars and learning about new tools and then connecting with people and networking. So LinkedIn doesn't have to be the way that one might think, very straightforward. And if that works for you, that's great. But I have used LinkedIn for business prospecting. I have used it for other ways of thinking about connecting with others and even just reaching out to people that I don't know. And it happened to me the other day. Somebody reached out to me and asked if they could talk to me. They noticed that I had gone to the Ithaca event, didn't get to meet me, and wanted to connect with me and network. And we set up a time and had a call.
Well, I think that's something important that you said, because when they reached out to you, they had a personalized message. It wasn't just, I want to be a contact. So you can see that there was something more to creating that connection other than just, you're a number in my Rolodex.
Yep, absolutely.
So I guess that kind of brings us to the whole business card piece of this, you know, and when and how do you use those effectively?
Well, you know, you're not just going to events to be a business card gatherer, and I think there are people that do it, and that's the old mantra for networking. What you want to do when you do, and I coach my clients this way, is when you are networking and you receive cards from somebody, write a note on the card. Or when you go home, make a note about that person, why you met them. What was it about them that attracted you to them? And maybe being that giver, what could you share with them and send to them so that that relationship goes beyond that first interaction? It's just not the first time you met them, but how do you keep that as an ongoing? So probably the first thing you would have done is you would have gone home and connected with them on LinkedIn without that personal message. But if you use that personal message, and you say, it was so wonderful to meet you last night, you know, we talked about such and such, and you send them a link about what you talked about, all of a sudden, that interaction now becomes a personal connection. You're starting to build trust and credibility with that person, and you're that giver and that sharer. And the other thing is, you know, a lot of times we take those business cards and we shove them in our desk and we forget about them, and they're like, oh yeah, I met that person. Now, what did they do? Who were they? So if you make a note and you remind yourself, and you can also, if you want, I discovered this thing called CC Cam Card, where you can scan the card in and create your own database. And if you do have a business where you want to go back and reach out to people, you can use that. But what's so great about this is you're collecting the information. You don't have to hang on to the cards, and you make notes. I do both. I keep the cards, and what I do is I put them in a notebook, and underneath that I write the date and when I met them and who they were and why I met them, because you never know, there might be somebody that I come across that could help them, and that goes back to me being a giver and very sharing and connector, and my friends and colleagues know that I do that a lot. I'm a really good connector, and what I've also found is because I've been so generous and I've done a good job of doing that, I've been on the receiving end where friends have come back to me and really connected me, and I use the example of how you and I met. So I introduced somebody to someone, and in the end, a couple of months later, they came back to me. So the value of how you use a database is really important.
So Amy, what do you want everybody to remember?
I want you to remember that you have to present yourself as a thought leader in the industry, and that you have to remember you're credible, and that you're where you are today because of who you are, and that confidence is so much about how you go out there and present yourself. That also providing value to others and really being a great giver and connector is so important. It's not just a one-sided relationship. That you can create wonderful relationships through social networking and events, and that it will open opportunities that you never encountered before if you can't get out there and do it in the personal touch. There are other ways to do it. Brand confidence is vital, and you are your own brand. Remember that. You are your brand. Whether or not you work for Liz Claiborne or you work for Macy's or you work for a footwear company, it doesn't matter. You are your own personal brand. And how you show up, how you look, how you present yourself, how you communicate are so important. And making sure that you put your best foot forward when you go to a networking event.
It's funny you say that. Our next event next month is going to be around social media and creating your own personal brand. So look forward to seeing some of that as well.
That's great. And the final thing that I want to leave you with is networking can be very time-consuming. So pick and choose the events you want to go to. Decide how you want to network. Don't just do it randomly. Have a strategy, have a plan, and invest your time wisely. And remember, by making more deposits or giving more, that you will have more withdrawals in the end, and it will generate long-term, really meaningful connections, relationships, and conversations.
Well, Amy, I want to thank you, and I think we're going to open up the floor right now to questions. Is there any questions out there? While we're waiting to shift from mute mode, one of our committee chairs yesterday brought up the conversation around women, and she's in an office where she has 90% women, and she said one of the things that she finds is that we're not always kind to one another. We tend to be very competitive, and you and I talked about this when we first started, that we don't always help one another. So what can we do to create more kindness?
I think what's important is to remember that we're all going through the same things, the all struggles, the same challenges, and that being a sharer, being a giver, the value and what you get back personally is so important. I learned that by being part of Ladies Who Launch. I learned that by being part of Savor the Success. I've learned that through interactions that I've had with people. And a lot of times when you've been capsized, downsized, you've shifted your job, you come with a different approach. And you have to remember that when somebody is working in a corporate environment, you want to take a step back and remember that you want to give and share, that it's not necessarily about what's in it for me and being competitive with that person, but knowing that you want to mentor and help people along the way. And I think that's so important, and that's one of the reasons why I transitioned my career to being a coach, is I saw that leadership and sharing and giving and mentoring other people is so important. And the value and the give back that you get personally by doing that is tremendous. And I think we all have to take that step back.
One question is, when you are in a cocktail reception sort of dynamic, what is a good way to end the conversation and move on to the next conversation so you can continue to meet more people?
Well, just so everyone knows, and Carol will talk about it, so I'll jump the gun a little bit here, we put together a great tips sheet for everybody, and in that are some great ending conversation stories. And I gave 3 wonderful examples, and one might be to say is, look, it's been so wonderful meeting you, but I'd really like to, explore some other things, or I really would like to connect with some of my other colleagues and friends. Let's stay in touch, so that you're not leaving abruptly, like Ugly Betty, but you're leaving in a way that people know that you've connected, and you're saying, let's stay in touch, or let's connect on LinkedIn and continue the conversation. So I've given you some great examples of what will be in the PowerPoint that will go out. A lot of great tips are in the back that I've put together for you with some wonderful videos, and Vanessa Van Edwards talks a lot about those. And for those of you that are big YouTubers or TED Talkers, she's a great person to watch. It really, if you're really feeling uncomfortable and you need to see it in action and role-playing, she talks a lot about some of those things too.
And a good thing to watch right before you go to an event, because you're like, oh, okay, I can use that. I mean, while we're waiting, in case we get some other ones, I know one of the things we talk about in our downloadable version is what is an elevator pitch and what is a good one.
So, and an elevator pitch is not one, like I talked about earlier, that you're just going to talk about who you are, but you want to get people to lean in. So what's really important is you want to differentiate yourself with your elevator pitch. And again, there's some great examples in the back, but starting it in a way that people will say, oh, wow, well, what do you do? And so I might say, something like, I help you connect the dots through improving your leadership skills and coaching you through that transition. And you'd be like, okay, well, what does that mean? Because what you want to do is make it in a way that somebody leans in and really wants to connect with you and say, wow, I want to learn more about you and more about what you're doing, as opposed to saying, hi, my name is Amy. And I think I've said that a couple of times. That's the old way of networking. The modern approach is connecting and really getting people to lean and have that conversation starter right away.
I think you'll go in also on the downloadable version about there are different elevator pitches for one if you're transitioning or if you're striving. Those different stages that we talked about has a different type of an elevator pitch to it. So I think that's important for everybody to check into as well.
One question we just received was, how do you strike up a conversation on email with a contact who you have not spoken with for a few years? but you're now contacting them because you're looking for a new job?
Well, I think what's really important is what you put in the header, in the subject line. So I use the example in the spirit of networking. And you really don't want to start out by saying, I'm looking for a job. Because if you do that, delete. Because if they're not that kind of person, they're going to say, well, I don't have a job here for them, so why bother? So if you put in the spirit of networking, looking to reconnect, and you start off by saying, in the spirit of networking, I'm looking to leverage my X. I mean, you're always looking to leverage your skills. You're always looking to transition. So you want to be able to put in an email context that you're seeking them out to network. You're seeking them out to learn more about what they've been doing in the years you have. And you can say it's been a long time. I've been tracking your progress, and it's so exciting to see you've landed in a blah, blah place, and you're doing this and that. And you always want to reference the fact that you're connecting with them, but also say, I would love to see if we can get together in the spirit of networking. I'm looking to leverage my expertise of working in the footwear industry, and I'm looking to see what opportunities might be out there that I might not have thought about. Because also, when you're looking for a job, it's not just the straight and narrow. It's like, I was a merchandiser, now I'm going to be a merchandiser, but how do you leverage that expertise? How do you think about approaching someone who you know has worked for some great companies and might give you some great insights to how you might use your background and expertise differently?
Well, and I think the other question is LinkedIn, checking your LinkedIn to see if you have any common connections where you can go to that common connection and say, can you do an introduction? That's what a connection is all about. And that helps you because once somebody connects you, it's like giving forward. It's that whole giving forward concept.
Right.
Can you repeat the name of the woman, Vanessa, that you said?
Vanessa Van Edwards, and her book is called Captivate. Great. And you can go into YouTube and you can put her in, and tons of videos come up. Her book is fantastic. It's very insightful. In the beginning of the book, there is actually a survey that you can take for yourself that really helps you narrow down the type of networker you are and where you feel comfortable and confident. And also, it's a great tool for you to see and be introspective about the type of person you are and who you like to meet. There were also some great facial expressions in there, and whether or not you're a poker face or really the type of person you are in networking, so that also how do you read people differently? Because sometimes when we do network, we overstay our welcome, and people are like tapping their fingers like, okay, we got to move on. So it's also not knowing when to start and when to end, but how do you read them? But the book is great. There's a lot of wonderful information out there, and it's a great resource and tool for those of you that are really struggling with networking. And as Carol said, I think some of her videos are fantastic.
Yeah, it's a fun read. It's not like a dry business book. It's a fun read. And the other thing I will say is after you read the book, you can sign up. She'll send you daily little YouTube videos that take you through different steps. So I'd highly recommend it.
So we have time for one last question, and this question is, what's the best way to pass a person's information that may be brand new connection to you onto a colleague? For example, they may not be the best connection for me, but a great connection for someone else who may not be at the networking event. And that's the common conversation,
Well, I just did that.
Yep.
I met, as I said earlier, I met this lovely woman who was doing a lot of really cool things in the intimate apparel world with innovation. And I had a colleague from my prior job in intimate apparel, and I connected them, and I said, after I met this person, I was thinking about you and thinking that they might really have some tools or innovation that really might help you grow your business. And so that's how I share that. I didn't know this contact really, really well, but when I met her, one of the things I did in order to say is like, well, I might know some people that might be able to help you in growing and leveraging or really can use the innovation that you've created. And so as I started to think about that, I wanted to connect her to someone in the industry, and knowing full well that someone might have wanted that innovation, and it might be really beneficial to them growing their business. So there are ways to do that, and it would be as in the spirit of networking again, or, thinking about you, met this wonderful person. So there are ways to do that. I think you just have to be creative and not think about it just very black and white, but creative and write in your email like you're talking to somebody, so it's a little bit more relaxed. It doesn't have to be a formal email in the spirit of networking.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We will be sending out the webinar with the enriched presentation, and it does have all the contacts and the link information as well. I want to thank Amy for joining us and for bringing this session to us. Amy is an amazing executive coach for you, and anybody who would like to have help in their next stage, you should definitely contact her directly. Her information will be in the webinar. And two housekeeping type things. One, our mentorship program, Amy brought up mentorship, is actually in its stages of accepting mentors and mentees for next year. So go on to the 210 website and please feel free to do that, as well as spread the message out to anyone in your organization that could benefit from that.